Hello everybody and welcome. It's Fiona Timms here, otherwise known as White Zulu, and the author of 5 autobiographies. They're now all in video format and available on YouTube. I want to welcome you to a couple of chapters from an autobiography I wrote when I was working at the Centre for Rehabilitation of Wildlife, otherwise known as CROW, in Yellowwood Park near the Steenbank Nature Reserve in Durban. I never got to finish this book as I became too ill to continue writing, but I can give you the chapters I did complete. Last time I left you with Gus, the Banded Mongoose, and here is the rest of my story about Gus. As you know, I'd had to bath him because he got so covered in food. Gus never forgot that bath. A few weeks later, I had pulled the same bowl, this ice cream tub, out from under the sink, filled it with water, and had tossed a couple of potatoes into it for baking. As I was scrubbing the earth off them, Gus, as usual, was watching from my shoulder. Suddenly he became very agitated. He squeaked and hid under my collar, rushing out now and then to give little shrieks of alarm. I wondered if he'd seen a snake, as the spotted bush snakes often slipped in through my open windows or doors unnoticed, until Gus or I found them. Once I was woken from a snooze on my bed, which was a large double mattress on the floor, on a steamy summer afternoon, by a cool snake slithering over my bare legs. The spotted bush snake delivers a little venom, enough to make one quite ill, rather than potentially dropping dead, as in the case of black and green mambas. As I dried my hands on a towel and began to look for the snake to throw it out, Gus relaxed and ran, squeaking joyfully down my arm to play bite my fingers. I realized then that he thought he was about to have a bath, having seen the potatoes getting theirs. While I was eating my own supper, Gus had to be restrained in his basket with the lid tied down. He'd been known to run up my bare leg from the floor and along my arm to snatch at a morsel I was about to put into my mouth. He'd tried the same trick with my son, Alistair, who had come to stay with me. We were standing around a braai, and Gus ran up the inside of Alistair's kikoi. It was the fashion at that stage for young students to wear a sarong, which they called the kikoi, using his sharp claws to clamber up to his shoulder and run along his arm to tug, growling ferociously at the lamb chop which Alistair was about to put in his mouth. Gus was learning to hunt. I had an old-fashioned bathtub with ball and claw feet, and he loved to search for whip scorpions in the dark recesses on the floor between the tub and the wall. He would come out victoriously, wearing a grey wig of cobwebs on his small head to crunch up his scorpion. He was still too small to tackle snakes, other than harmless little grass snakes, which now and again wriggled in through the crack under my door. He pounced on these just behind the head, which he bit off immediately, in true mongoose fashion. I would watch him devour his prey until just the tip of the snake's tail stuck out of his mouth like a toothpick. then wipe his mouth on the grass mat and hop into my lap for a well-earned snooze. One evening I was reading a book and enjoying the peace and quiet after a busy day in the clinic. Eventually I realized it was too quiet. Where was Gus? I cast my mind back to where I'd seen him last, supper time. Calling him, I searched everywhere, and then remembered that I'd seen him investigating my small fridge while I was putting things away after my meal. I opened the door of the fridge, and there was Gus sitting in the lettuce crisper eating the contents. He would have been quite happy to guzzle every morsel of food in there before squeaking to be let out. It was always my policy from then on to inspect the fridge every time I opened and closed the door, and I often caught him in mid-hop trying to get in again. Though Gus still drank from his bottle 3 times a day, he was growing bigger. The time would come when I would have to release him back into the wild. To prepare him, I would poke his food down the many cricket holes in the lawn outside my hut, while he was still asleep in his basket in the early mornings. I would shove his favorite bacon rinds and pieces of Vienna sausage far down into the holes with a stick, and then go back to let him out. I did sentry duty for him, as another member of the troop would, while he foraged, watching for dangers such as yellow-billed kites, those agile buzzards which would snatch a small, unwary mongoose. There were even different alarm barks. A certain pitch warned of danger from overhead, such as kites and eagles. He would also use that particular bark to warn me of the SAA Boeing carrying Flight 525 from Durban to Johannesburg, and another pitch for smaller birds of prey, often, in his case, single-engine planes. Gus would snuffle his way across the lawn, stopping to dig with lots of sand flying up behind him, and then return to my hut, triumphantly carrying his breakfast high, to munch it up near my feet, and then run off to find another one. A few weeks after Gus arrived, I got another pair of infants to raise. These were 2 Genet kittens, aged about 10 days. The large spotted Genet, Genetta tigrina, is a cat-like nocturnal member of the same Viveridae family as mongooses, and thus quite a close cousin to Gus. These 2 kittens had been discovered in the roof of a house nearby. The householder had thought he had rats and had sent his young son up to investigate. The boy had discovered the kittens asleep in their nest after the mother Genet had bolted out of a small hole in the eaves. The householder blocked up the hole and brought the kittens to us. He didn't want Genets living in his roof, as he was mistakenly under the impression that they carry rabies. This is neither true of Genets nor of mongooses and meerkats, which are often killed needlessly for that reason. In days, the kitten's eyes had just opened, and I modified another doll's bottle teat for them. Their formula was very similar to Gus's, and they settled in and began to thrive. I had made up a basket like his, but they wouldn't stay in there. They yowled pathetically until I let them out, and I decided to give them the run of the cottage, having closed all the windows first. They chose a tissue box as their bed. Being nocturnal, they were quite happy to squeeze through the slit of the cardboard box and sleep on top of the few remaining tissues all day. At night, they commandeered the shoulder Gus wasn't occupying, and when I went to bed, they played until dawn. I got used to sleeping through thumps and scrubbling noises as they raced up and down my curtains after geckos and launched themselves high into the air to pounce onto each other. Gus was delighted with his new playmates and joined in their games whenever he could, to the extent that I decided to leave him at home one morning when I went up to the clinic. I came home after a few hours to find no sign of any of them. When I called, 3 little heads popped out of the slit in the tissue box. Gus's slightly narrower face wedged between the distinctly marked genet kittens. He became nocturnal until a week or so later, when Angus arrived, another baby banded mongoose. Angus was slightly older than Gus had been when he'd come in. Angus had fur and his eyes were already open. He was brought into the clinic inside a budgie cage, squeaking anxiously and holding the bars of the cage with his tiny paws. I introduced him to Gus and took the genets out to the mammal cages, as they were now fully weaned and needed to be isolated in preparation for release, as they are solitary. I had really been keeping them in my cottage as company for Gus's sake. Both mongooses needed to be bottle fed and still got their dish of raw mince and eggs mixture. By now, I had an orphan baby vervet monkey to bottle feed as well. I carried this particular baby around with me in a woolen shawl tied around my waist, as she needed feeding frequently throughout the day and night. At home, I wrapped her in the same shawl and tucked her up on a cushion laid on the floor in case she rolled off, while I got a few chores done around the house. I was brushing my teeth one evening and heard shrieking from the monkey. On investigation, I discovered both Gus and Angus had grabbed her long, furry grey tail and were dragging her backwards along the grass carpet in a sort of growling team effort, as they would with a prize meal they would take back to the burrow to share with the rest of the troop. I rescued the hysterical monkey and comforted her, chuckling to myself on the irony of the higher primate being so easily bullied by these 2 little thugs. The breeding season was in full swing. This was December, and I admitted 3 more baby banded mongooses, as well as the usual number of baby vervet monkeys, along with many other species of mammals and birds. I now had 5 nearly weaned mongooses of roughly the same age. By the time I got Fergus, I was running out of names for them. And because they were to be released as part of a troop, it was now hard to tell them apart. They became the Bandits, a group name, which testified to their behavior as well. Now, when I went to feed the baby rhino every 4 hours in his boma, a well-fortified pen, built especially for him in the shade of some flat-topped acacia thorn trees, I was always followed by the bandits. It was a strange procession. I would lead the way carrying a basket and two 2-litre Coke bottles filled with rhino formula and capped with rubber calf teats. Behind me surged a small swarm of furry brown mongooses who travelled very close to my heels and ran in a sort of undulating motion, hurrying in short bursts over open territory and stopping frequently to look for danger. It looked like I was being followed by a living shadow. When I reached the boma, I would stop, put down the open basket, and staring up at the sky, make an alarm bark. The effect was instantaneous, and the troop would dive as one into the safety of their basket. I would close the lid to ensure that they wouldn't be trampled by Toliwe, the white rhino, as he thundered at full gallop towards his bottles. His human foster mothers had to wait until he skidded into the sturdy poles with a crash, then slipped through a specially built gap to plug the first bottle into his wide mouth. The bandits were ready to go up to the marble cages and join the troop of several older banded mongoose brought to us under different circumstances, hit by cars or cornered in gardens by dogs. They love dog food and frequently raid the dishes of food left outside for dogs too big to live indoors. Dogs like Dobermans and Rottweilers that don't appreciate their dinners being stolen by mongooses. After stitching up dog bites or setting broken limbs, we would put the survivors into a large sunny cage with a sandy floor and plenty of bushes, logs, and toys to recuperate before release. I put the bandits into a cage adjacent to the adults so they were separated only by wire mesh, and let them get on with all the calling, squeaking, and marking that goes with a mongoose greeting ceremony. Marking involves dragging their hindquarters over each other and various bits of territory. They each have a scent gland under the tail, and this leaves a trail distinctive to each troop member. If I had introduced the bandits to the adults by putting them into the same cage straight away, the older mongooses would have attacked and probably killed the little ones. They would have seen them as a rival troop. I intended to keep the two groups separate for a week to scent mark each other through the safety of the wire barrier and get accustomed to one another. I had educational tours going through the centre on a daily basis, and it was one morning that I was in the mammal cage giving the bandits their morning feed. Banded mongooses have a special trick. If one finds a bird's egg, he seizes it between his forepaws, trundles it along the ground backwards to something large and solid like a boulder or tree trunk, then hurls the egg backwards between his hind legs so that it breaks open with a sharp crack against the rock. I had a plate of raw eggs which I placed on the floor of the cage. I was doing a school tour and told the group of waiting school children to watch carefully. Gus ran to grab an egg and proceeded to perform his party piece. I was telling the children a bit about mongoose behavior when I received a sharp and painful crack on my shins. One of our student nurses had sneaked a golf ball in with the eggs and this is what Gus had hurled against my bare legs with some force. It had seemed to him like a perfectly good hard object to crack his egg against. The children were, of course, helpless with laughter, and after that we often gave the bandits a golf ball to throw around. I went into the bandit's cage one morning a fortnight later and caught and covered every one of the members with deodorant from a can. Then I quickly slipped all 5 youngsters into the next door cage. Adults raced over to the newcomers and started marking them with their own scent glands. This was just to disguise the scent of the deodorant. It was a men's deodorant. These older mongooses had all the skills essential for survival in the wild, and it remained for us to ensure that Gus and the bandits acquired a healthy fear of humans. Mongooses who ran squeaking with joy towards people would inevitably end up in a cooking pot, his hide as headgear, or, worst of all, a live captive to be used for tagati, witchcraft. We would only approach the cage now to slip their food in while shouting and stamping our feet to frighten them. This was always the worst aspect of preparing hand-raised wild animals for release. Having gained their trust in order to mother and keep them alive in the beginning, without completing the cycle by making them fear us, would have condemned them to a life in captivity. Thus, bandits became part of the main troop of 15, which we subsequently released in a carefully selected game reserve nearby. A ranger reported to us that a year later their numbers had increased substantially, indicating that the troop was breeding and was a viable number to survive and thrive. And that was the end of, not the end of Gus, but how Gus survived and was eventually let into the wild. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my videos and my stories of my life. And I want to thank John Moslane for being what I call the sound engineer, but I'm sure there's a more professional word for it. However, faithful, and for 4 years now, I think, he has been here for me every Wednesday. Well, I think it's Wednesdays, but once a week to record 2 chapters of whichever book it is I'm reading. And without him, this couldn't be done. So a big thank you to John. Also, Sean van Vuren, we send the videos to him. Sorry, I'm not reading this. I'm just doing it off the cuff. And my brain is a bit tumor. And Sean uploads them to the YouTube channel where you can find them all in playlists. He does it beautifully. And I want to thank them both for all the help that they give me. Well, it's not help. They do everything for me. And it's a great asset. So also, I have a website called whitezulubook.com. Obviously www in front of it, but you'll find it there. Quite easy to find. Johnny Clegg's called The White Zulu. Mine's called White Zulu. And you will find on my website, you'll find all kinds of photographs going way back to when my ancestors settled in the Cape, 1652. Well, not photographs of them, but descriptions. This photograph of my grandmother's wedding, and lovely, lovely photos of the farm we still own. My sister sent me a photograph this morning of the farm in midsummer, and she says how beautiful it's looking. I've had a lot of rain. So, just want to thank my helpers, John and Sean, to thank you all for listening, and also please share this with everybody else. Hit the like button and enjoy. Goodbye.